Afternoon, folks. It's a wet, rainy Sunday afternoon, so you'll have to excuse my casual attire. We've just got through the last round of marking late submissions for assignment 1, and we're now pretty much coming on. We're facing assignment 2 almost immediately. So look, I want to get something out to you really quickly in terms of some sort of briefing. I've put together a reading list. It's a little shorter than assignment 1, and the reason for that is the reading list that you had access to for assignment 1, that's all relevant. So just use it, use the material. It's really good material. Okay, so the way to look at assignment 2 is that you've got this context. Well, what's the context? The context is some really significant macroeconomic change, so some big picture economic change that's impacting Australia really significantly. What sort of impacts are we seeing? Well, we're seeing changes in our economic structure, and Malcolm Turnbull yesterday just announced an election. There's going to be a lot of talk about economic transition, so you'll hear that a lot in this election because it's something that is happening. So what we're trying to do in these assignments is look at what's happening, what's happening 20 years ago, what kind of practices have been happening over the last 20 years. We're trying to look at what's happening right now because we're facing some really, we live in interesting times. We're facing some significant change, and you'll hear that kind of rhetoric through the election campaign. And we're trying to not just have that, running through our heads as a kind of abstract discourse that you hear politicians talking about. What we're trying to do is really pull that into focus in our own lives, in our own professional practice, in the things that we have to do every day. So assignment 1 explored that kind of context. You saw big picture theory. So for the last 40 years people have been talking about, in fact longer than 40 years, people have been talking about, there's this change that seems to be happening in advanced industrialized economies or post-industrial economies. So there's a significant body of theory and evidence that's been building over 40-50 years, with Manuel Castells providing the most substantial empirical evidence-based discussion in recent times over the last 2 decades. So he's really the most prominent thinker in information society, or what he describes as network society thinking. So there's this theory and evidence in kind of academic discourse, but there's also stuff happening. So we look at government policy. Government policy seems to tie in with what's happening in theory. So what can we draw from there? Well, we can look at the fact that the national broadband network has been a political football over the last 2 or 3 electoral cycles. And why are we investing $43 billion in the national broadband network if it's just so your kids can watch cartoons on YouTube? It's about a lot more than that, and I hope that from the context that each of you has built a picture of in assignment 1, that you're seeing that there's some big stuff happening here. Okay, so that's the context. We've got theory, we've got policy, we've got really sort of everyday empirical evidence like, nobody makes cars in Australia anymore. Manufacturing, that kind of old school factory floor manufacturing, that doesn't happen anymore. Okay, so why is this relevant to you guys if you're going to work in the information industry? Well, what does the information industry do? What's it for? What's it for? Why not just get rid of it? So people actually are asking those kinds of questions as technology disrupts existing industries. Why not just do away with it? If everyone's got an internet enabled smartphone, if I can just find whatever I want right away on this phone, why do I need reference interviews and that kind of thing? What's the point? So you got to think about what's going to happen in professional practice. Professional practice has got to align. It's got to align with contemporary contemporary policy agendas, contemporary economic drivers, contemporary challenges that are facing the education sector. So education itself is changing in some fairly radical ways. The way you're studying this particular subject are really different from the way for example, I studied most of the education that higher education that I went through. So there's some really significant change happening, and we're trying to engage with that. We're not trying to look at it, in the abstract. We're trying to really engage and say, okay, so what's our part in this change that's happening? How can we be conscious of this change and contribute in a positive way in terms of facing these challenges? So that's why we're trying to present a kind of case study situation, a hypothetical scenario where you have to actually respond to this innovation agenda. And I think that can be challenging. That can be challenging because it's asking you to be creative. It's asking you to be really creative, and it's saying, don't just look at what's happened like 20 years ago. It's saying, what do you want to do now? What might we do? What are the possibilities? And I'll give you an example from a subject that I teach on social media. So we do something a little bit similar where students have to implement a social media project in their workplace. So a lot of them do it in their workplace if that's possible for them. And one of my students said to me, so you want us to invent a new Facebook? Which was like a fair question, and the answer is no, but if you do, I want a percentage. So innovation, let's go back to basic principles. Innovation is about doing something differently. It's about you making some decisions about how you might use technology in creative ways. So I don't want you to metaphorically invent a new Facebook, but I do want you to think, how might I use Facebook to do something interesting at work, or if I was working in this kind of particular context. So you can be as specific, as precise, or as big picture as you want. And I'm following up with a set of resources that gives you some of the big picture. So, for example, the Australian Library and Information profession has done some studies over the last couple of years that I and my colleagues have contributed to about the future of the profession. What's the future of the profession going to be over the next decade? Because we're not trying to equip you for 10 years ago. We're trying to equip you for 10 years into the future. So have a look at that ALIA research. It's written up in very digestible form, and again, what I've tried to do here is give you material that's really accessible. It's really digestible. There's work from CSIRO, who are Australia's premier brain trust. But the report is all about the library, museums, archives, galleries sector, but it's about the challenges that they're facing over the next decade. So we've got the most high profile input in terms of Australia's brain power, and it's written up really in a way that's really digestible. So you got to draw from this material. It's just like a crime if you don't draw from this material. It's there. Just use it. Just use it, and allow yourself to think. Like, oh yeah, what might we do? So if you want to talk about the profession as a whole, that's fine. If you want to do that with one of your recommendations and make another of your recommendations much more specific, much more precise about how you might do something differently at work, then that's fine too. This isn't. Don't get trapped by assignments. The assignment is an opportunity for you to show me some of your ideas. It's not just about regurgitating, what an academic journal told you to say. It's about you being creative with ideas and demonstrating that you have the capability to do that. It's not about parroting back something you read, online. So get creative. Show us that you have the capacity for creative thought, that you can do that, because that's something you'll need in professional practice. The future is about constant change, challenges, digital disruption. So it's not about doing something in a really traditional way. It's about facing challenges each and every day and using the kind of generic skills that you're developing here to face those challenges, to respond to them, to find solutions. Okay, and to look into the future and see the kinds of challenges that are emerging and that you might have to respond to, and about putting practices or technological solutions in place to combat those challenges before they hit. So you can beat the impact by doing this kind of horizon scanning that we're trying to ask you to do today. So draw on everything that you did in assignment 1. Use the reading list for assignment 1 as to help with the context, but get into some of this material about innovation that I'm going to follow through with after this recording, and get creative. Okay, the material that I'm providing it's really accessible. You can get through it. Trust me. I know it's only 2-3 weeks away from assignment submission, but it's really accessible. So please do dive into it, because it just encourages you to think as an innovator, as someone who can innovate in their practice. And remember that it is about innovation in practice. So you don't have to invent a new Facebook, you don't have to re-index the web and do what Google does, but you might think about how you can incorporate those kinds of services into your own professional practice or into your service delivery. So it might be about, Karina mentioned that somebody had been talking on the forum about the use of space, and that's brilliant. So it's about whatever it is that happens in your professional practice, think in a different way about it. Like, just approach it from a different angle. How could we do that differently? Is there a better way of doing that? Whose needs am I serving here? Do we need to adjust what we do in order to meet those needs more appropriately? Okay. So I think that gives you food for thought. I think that if you follow up with the readings, that'll take you into a good mind space as well. So I'll let you get on with that. Karina has also forwarded a message to the forum about what are your issues with this assignment. I'll follow that up on those as well. I might package them up so that everybody gets the benefit of my response to the question, and I'll forward that out to the group as a whole through the week. But I want to get you up and running and thinking in the right in the right headspace as quickly as possible. So that's what this afternoon's been about. So get going.